Hello and welcome to the Stacking Dinger Show, episode 3. I am here, Matthew, aka Sheep, aka Dark Sheep, with my friend Brendan Tuma, Too Much Tuma on Twitter. We are just diving right in tonight. And so, Tuma, what have you been working on since the last we last we talked, last a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, so you and I did the first episode. Chris and I did the second with you in the background role, and then we took a week off, and now we're back. Um, to me, kind of the story of what's going on with drafting right now on Underdog MLB is that this time last year we didn't have a contest up, so everything feels a little bit ahead of the game, and that's what I keep trying to remind myself. We're almost getting a little bit extra time to play around with draft structures and player takes and all that sort of stuff. I think me, you, and Chris in our group chats have been talking a lot about structure so far because there's always going to be time for player takes, especially when we get to spring training and that sort of thing. So for me, it's been a lot of thought, through that, messing around with some different things, talking, to you guys. And yeah, I got to get another piece out on the Stack and Dinger Substack soon because definitely got a few ideas. Chris did some research on something that I kind of want to follow up on. So yeah, that's been it for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what you're saying, tonight we are going to be diving into some more pretty structure-y type talk. Um, Personally, I've been sort of out of the loop for about a week and a half between being sick, 2 weeks between being sick and being traveling for work. So last couple of days, basically, I've been working on getting back into uh, getting a pulse on things, and basically my conclusion is outfielders got even more expensive. Everything else pretty much stayed the same, and outfielders moved up, which we'll get to as we get on here tonight. Our main topic is something I'm just calling general draft strategy, general draft philosophy. Um, we're not really talking about like outliers tonight, and maybe we'll get to an episode on how to build outlier teams and building weird. But tonight is building just with a general draft philosophy of balance. So the last couple of weeks, we've looked at some of the initial data and analysis by Chris that showed it's really starting to prove out that balance is the best build.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. Just, if you do something weird, like 5 pitchers, 8 pitchers, that sort of thing, it's not to say it's impossible for it to work. It's just, as Chris calls it, you want to be directionally accurate. And it's just going to give you the most shots on goal, if you will, about advancing to the playoffs and all that sort of thing. So, that's kind of how I took it. I think, people who have never played Underdog before, like one of the first questions that I get sometimes is like how many of each position do you want to draft? So it's nice that we seem to be trending towards a consensus on that.
Yeah, and obviously consensus can lead to bad assumptions and stuff, but I feel like we have enough data for these first couple of seasons that we've done the analysis that is showing the results of balance being best. So
Mm-hmm.
that comes out to be 6 or 7 at each position. So that's sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about balance. Um, the other thing is to the balance, to me, the second thing is distributing your picks along the whole draft into the 6 or 7 amount evenly. So the balance you're trying to balance is it's a lot of things, and it's the thing that makes drafting Underdog just so much fun to me, and how I can keep doing it over and over is balancing these things. So you're balancing ADP cost with positional scarcity along with uh, projectable points and volume.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and obviously, the outliers exist in the projections and stuff, and things aren't going to be exactly accurate. But those are basically the three things: the cost of the player, that where you're drafting them, who you're missing at that same draft area, is what I build into ADP cost, and then how you balance the position scarcity, which we talk about over and over, outfield and pitcher and infielder and balancing that. Um, and then like just projectable players.
I almost wish that the players who are projected to score the most points, like the very best player, that we had some infielders to kind of spice up that first round, because it is kind of just. I know we've said we want to do an episode on okay, which first round outfielder do you take if you do get one of those top 10 picks, but yeah, I do think that would make at least round one more interesting. And for me, last year was okay, we need a first round outfielder. Maybe if you get lucky, you find yourself in a spot where you take another one in the second or third round. And so far this offseason, it's been more, okay, we understand that at this point, and how do you really build this room? Because can you, take an outfielder in the first and then kind of wait until the seventh? I know I have some thoughts on that question, but that goes back to what you're saying about just kind of building out your draft philosophy and what can you get at this price that you can't get at this other price. And, I think that's what we're wanting to dive into tonight.
Yeah, and specifically with outfielders, the sort of mantra, I don't know if it's a mantra or the thing, uh, you know, I was still tuned into some conversations and stuff about the game while I was out of the like draft loop, but there's the conversations about like specific outfielders. I'm not gonna name. It doesn't matter who they are, but ultimately the thing that I kept thinking was, well, you have to draft outfielders at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So really balancing and building a balanced lineup is, to me, and you kind of wrote about this, is figuring out where you're going to be taking those outfielders in your draft. So yeah, I think you called it inside out drafting.
Yeah, that's something I want to write about more this offseason, both for Underdog and just for fantasy sports in general, honestly. But and it makes sense. Like the fantasy industry, we're going to spend all this time talking about first round picks because, that's what, if you're not like a real hardcore player and, you're gearing up for your first fantasy or your only fantasy football draft in August, like you want to ask a quote unquote expert, hey, who should I take in the first round type thing. And, that totally makes sense. But, I think the best way to approach drafts is the first round. It almost, again, it's not that it doesn't matter because you got to think that through and you got to be right more often than you're not. But it's just that everyone's great in the first round. And where drafts are really won is more in those like early to middle rounds, I would say, where people start diverging into different paths. So I want to think through. That's why I call it like inside out. I want to kind of start my process in the middle of the draft, and this is different on Underdog because round one is basically all outfielders anyway. But if you're playing a season long roto league, this is just like another way to kind of think about your approach to that. So um, I've found some pockets that for outfield, kind of makes sense. And it does one negative of it, it leads to taking the same players,
Yeah,
over and over sort of thing, because it's bankable that they're there, and then you're, a little bit exposed if they do get hurt or underperform or whatever. But I do not think ADP is efficient right now. And I do think that's leading to us getting some values, both at the outfield, but also at the other positions to kind of cover up for what you're missing in the early rounds.
yeah. Just like as an example of thinking through a certain pocket of outfielders, there's this late mid late pocket of guys that used to be fantasy studs that we have questions about. So there's this pocket of and I don't know the ADPs offhand, but there's this group of Chris Bryant, Eloy Jimenez, Giancarlo Stanton, and like a little bit later Byron Buxton. But I put them in the same category. So if just as an example, you are building your team and you know that pocket exists, and like maybe there's not even one that you love, but you think, oh, I know this group's going to be there, and it's risky, and but it makes sense. I'm taking these three uh, outfielders in the first 6 rounds that I feel better about. Like, and now I know that there's these guys that maybe I'm willing to take a risk on. So that's just an example I'm thinking of that I've noticed the last few drafts. There's that group of very similar players that we just worry about how much they're actually going to play, but they
Hmm.
could still be points per plate appearance, like smashes.
And that's why you want to know, where those pockets are, because every draft, you might get the second overall pick, or you might get the 11th overall pick, and that's going to change, where these guys pop up in ADP if people are drafting off ADP. Which one thing I would say is, especially this time of year, I think, Chris kind of instilled this in my brain the last time we talked, but he made a great point. Like, don't be afraid, jump 3 rounds, especially once you get beyond round 10 sort of thing, because it's not efficient. I mean, you could make that case, even in March, but things will be, in a sharper place by then. But especially right now, know where those pockets are, like you said, and we're going to talk through some, specific examples of some teams that you and I have drafted through a certain point. Um, one of those pockets for me is honestly as soon as the second round. I am not positive that Kyle Schwarber. I'm doing like a triple negative here, but like I think if someone took Kyle Schwarber at pick 11, to me, like that is totally okay. And if you can get him in the second round at any point and pair him with another one of the elite outfielders, that might be honestly my preference over than um, pairing one of the first round outfielders with Bobby Witt or Freddie Freeman or someone like that.
Yeah, actually, we'll get to that because that is a start that I had in my example lineup that I got ready for later. So
An
yeah,
outfielder with a first round outfielder with Schwarber.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
people are getting those starts, obviously because Schwarber's in the second round. Like,
yeah,
it's not always going to be one of the pitchers with him, and um, I think that's why we talk a lot. I know the Badge Bros are really good about talking about thinking differently, scrolling down, all that sort of stuff, and here we're saying with your structure, stay balanced, don't get too weird with that, and I think that's the right point. When it comes to being okay with thinking weird, and this isn't even that weird, but it's just so natural. It's like, okay, I got my outfield anchor in round one. Look at this superstar infielder I can get now, and look at this ace pitcher I can get. And it's natural to just want to try to start to build balance. But I think one of the biggest edges right now is being comfortable with through the first 6 rounds, having 3 or 4 outfielders and being weak at those other positions, and then knowing those pockets where you can make it up later and almost get the best of both worlds, because you're not going to be able to pull it off every time. It depends on your draft position. But especially right now, like I do think those exist, those quote unquote, dream drafts.
yeah. I think right now that sort of beginning structure, along with a first round outfielder and then two stud infielders from that first couple of rounds, is also like I'm skipping that first tier of pitcher, but I'm getting two infield studs, then just like, and then from there going outfield pitcher, and then filling in because I spent where that high ADP cost on two infielders, just waiting till the end. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'll grab one more, a third one somewhere where there's a falling value. But yeah, so those are the start that you were talking about, along with that outfielder, two stud infielders, is kind of the balance bills that I'm liking the most right now.
So another way that I phrased it in our chats with me, you, and Chris is early round priorities. Let's just call it the first 5 rounds or something. You have to give up something. I guess you can technically be balanced, but even if you through 5 rounds you have two pitchers, two infielders, and an outfielder, like I think like, you just gave up a ton of outfield value um, in that scenario. So every pick it has opportunity cost, and you're getting a great player, but so is everyone else. And what are you doing about the structure of it to put your great players in a better spot with talent and points scored around them? um and it sounds like to me like you just talking it through, like that first tier of pitchers, maybe even the second tier of pitchers is kind of what you're willing. Um and I'm kind of just like setting you up here because I think I agree with you, but that sounds like you're willing to sit that out. And I for listeners to understand, can you talk through, kind of why that is? Like, why are you reaching that conclusion that, you're prioritizing other things early in the drafts other than those aces?
So for me, it's just the amount that those aces can like separate from the pack. Like pretty specifically, it's Strider, Cole, and um, based on ADP, not based on, I don't think, upside, but Gaussman and Burns. Those are the
Hmm.
four that basically I'm missing almost completely out on because I'm taking outfield, infield, or outfield, infield. Because the graphs, if you go back last week to the graphs that uh, Chris put out on the just the fall off between those first few rounds of those positions compared to the step down of as you take them later and later, just the ability to separate in points from the outfield and infield position compared to the pitcher just has me more comfortable skipping those guys. Obviously, I think, and out of those guys, I think Strider could just like be a, like if he stays healthy, he figures out like when the starts this year, he figures out when he gets that little velo dip that he kind of struggled through this past season. Um, if he can like improve, and he's obviously smart, he can do that. I think he could be a like just smash every other pitcher in scoring.
Hmm.
But um, at this point, I don't feel like I need to take him. Like he's the one I'm worried about,
Hmm.
but the idea of separating from the other pitchers is really what it comes down to.
I think a couple things. So much of what's funny to me about like the analysis we do, and people do the same. It's the same things happening in NFL right now, where some people are up in arms about their advance rate. Like what happens in the playoff weeks is just it really matters. I mean, it's you can have like the best process possible, and then you get to the playoff weeks, and we can go on this whole off-season crusade about structure, and you can't take an early round pitcher, and then you get to the playoff weeks, and if Strider goes nuclear in July and August, then maybe that's just like what you needed. And so then we're going to talk about a little bit of exposure later, and we can touch on it then. But keeping it with pitching right now, I think I think a common piece of fantasy advice that people are going to get this year, whether it's underdog or roto or other points, like whatever you're playing, is to wait on pitching, because I think people are looking around and agreeing with you that some of these aces aren't separating from each other, necessarily the way they used to might have. And then even then, the group of 12 quote unquote SP1s aren't separating from the SP2s, and those guys aren't separating from the SP3s. It feels like a big old glob. And that's why, Scott White, Paul Sporer, some of these guys are talking about the glob exists. And I agree with them that the glob exists, especially once you get down the totem pole after Strider and some of those guys. It feels like SB 13 through SB 35 is, there's so many different directions you can go in. So it then does make sense to wait. My thing about that, which is something that I was passionate about last year, is that doesn't mean you can wait on pitchers to the very end. And if you're thinking of drafting inside out, that does mean I like hitting the middle end of the quote unquote glob, where I want to have my, ideally, fifth pitcher if people are still getting their third or fourth. And so there's some of those pockets like you talked about with outfield. I've noticed some with pitchers where I'm really liking hitting that tier before I think it then falls off and there is a dip.
Yes, yeah. So following on from that, like that build that I'm most comfortable with right now, I am hitting like three pitchers in the next 5 rounds after those first 3 rounds. So
And it's funny. I
I'm
think you showed me one team, so I'm not positive if it's what you're doing on every team, but it's almost even more capital than I was willing to go with some of it, which I'm not
Yeah.
saying is right, wrong, or bad. I'm just saying like that was something that jumped out to me is like you're the pitching staff that you constructed, even with thinking you're waiting is to me it looked like pretty good. Like I'm looking at like the combo of like Chris Bassett and Sonny Gray as like the 2-3 sort of
Oh,
thing.
okay. Yeah. And
And
those
that's
are
pushing
more
it a little bit.
like my 4 or 5s.
Okay. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I obviously like yours better, and then it's what are you sacrificing in the rounds where you're taking those pitchers, and um,
so I'm
we'll talk about that.
sacrificing. We can talk about it now. I'm sacrificing a bunch of infielders there. The Paul Goldschmidts. He's the example that we talked about on episode 1 that really blew up from that very similar position. I wasn't drafting much of him because I was taking outfielders, and now this year more I'm taking pitchers. So there is definitely a group of infielders that I'm missing out on, and even like a group of outfielders. Um, I feel less worse about missing out on like um, Anthony Santander, who
Hmm.
I love. Like I will still take him if it makes sense on the team, but like that's just an example of a guy who's in that group that he's not a like flashy pick, but he's like a consistent outfielder in that group there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm definitely giving up a group of position players for these builds.
Um, if you have it up, I think we each have a team that we want to talk to at some point. I think it's a good spot to start to look at each of ours. What we did is we each kind of took a screenshot of a team through a certain point in the draft where we felt this was a statement we were making with how we were constructing these teams, and there's outfield they are outfield heavy starts. And so here,
Yeah.
Matt just pulled up
So
mine, and
we'll start with yours. Yours is a little bit earlier in the draft, so we'll start with yours first.
yeah,
Um,
what pick did I have here? I had the 10th pick. Um, And so, just
yep.
for the listeners, if you don't have video, I'll just run through it quickly. It went Tucker in round 1 at pick 10, and then it went Trout, and then I went Yelich. So I started with 3 outfielders. Then I went Altuve for that infield anchor. Then I went Kirby to get a pitcher, and then I just was staring at Ian Happ, and it felt too good to pass up. So this is definitely, I really liked it through 3 rounds, and then I might have pushed it one too far. Or sorry, I really liked it through 5 rounds with the 3 outfielders, and then
Mhm.
I might have pushed it one too far by taking a 4th outfielder in round 6. But I'm curious your thoughts seeing this. Again at this point in the draft, what your takeaway is.
Yeah. So it's very uh, maybe can't think of the word. It's goes maybe against like this whole idea we started with. Oh, we got to build balanced, but
Mm-hmm.
this is an extreme or not extreme. This is an example of part of the balance is balancing the position scarcity. So when you hear balance, you might think at this point, oh, I'll have 2 of each position. But more so, what we're talking about in balance is, you know, balancing how we're going to build the way forward. So I know, like, so this is a great start. Like to me, I can see the future how this
Mm-hmm.
is going to go
So,
in the draft. So like not to get like specific player take. I know you're really high on George Kirby. I think he's pretty expensive, uh, but um, for me, like having that infield anchor really helps you ignore infield for a while. You can still build 7 infielders in this. Start
mm-hmm.
waiting because, and this is where the balance comes in, because you took the 4 outfielders at this point and Kirby was your first pitcher. Um, like now, this to me, this is a 7 pitcher team,
Mm-hmm.
100%. Like so, like I see the vision here of what you're doing and how you're building. And now outfielder, you can definitely stop at 6. You could
Mm-hmm.
maybe even 5 here. Um, if you really, if you did want to start pushing more into an extreme, I'd still probably go 6. But yeah, I see this and I see where it's going.
And so again, I want to be clear, like through 5 rounds, I really loved it. And then Ian Happ was just to me at that point was really looking like a good value based on the projections I was looking at. I've played around with a lot of different projections on the Fangraph auction calculator and downloading them myself and then calculating per plate appearance and all this stuff. So I'm really, deep in the projection game. And I think that that's really well, right now I'm saying it's just something I've been like thinking about,
Hmm.
every day really. And I think that that's really sharp just to and I think that 3, 5 years from now, like the way we're going to be talking about projections specifically for Underdog is just going to be, light years ahead of what we're going to talk about
Yeah,
tonight. I think we're going to keep learning more. So I do encourage people to download projections from Fangraphs and use them. But then you can't the what it then becomes is this puzzle of what you're talking about with your draft philosophy of what can you get at one spot that you can't get another, and it becomes a puzzle with the projections to build the highest scoring team possible using those point totals. And I think that that is an edge right now, but there's going to be a point where that isn't, where you need to step back and understand that that projection is not gospel. There's going to be injuries, there's going to be underperformance, other people are going to overperform. You got to think about how these points are being scored on a weekly basis. So I just want to, throw that out there
I
because I've been talking a lot about projections and I think it's good, but I'm also willing to acknowledge that if it's a bad projection, then it's going to mess up the entire plan.
yeah, and I would actually push back a little bit that I think starting with projections has become is getting closer to just being table stakes. Like I'm thinking back to uh, the back when it was 18 rounds and I was first getting into this format, and like I was loading up the bat season long projections and just looking at ADP back what 3 seasons ago, and it was like night and day, like ADP versus projection. Like nobody was doing it. It was really small contest, so
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's hard to really even out ADPs and all that sort of like secondary discussion. But I think we're in just following conversations that people are having. I think we're close to that being table stakes. But then again, there's still Ian Happ was specifically someone that came up when I was talking about this. Like, when are you going to draft an outfielder? He was specifically someone that came up, and people were saying, "Oh, well, I don't know how I can pick him at 65 like that." And really, it's like you have to pick somebody. So where in the outfield do you think is the correct spot? What is what it comes down to me?
Yeah, and so I'm just pulling up because I have it from last year. Where'd he finish? Ian Happ was the 25th highest scoring player last year. Like he was also really good. Just in general. So and that's not even looking at projecting for this year. So he is, like he's not, his game is actually really good for underdogs. A lot of walks and doubles, and he plays every day, and he hits, and then the top part of the lineup. So it's Yelich is kind of another one like that. Is a little bit more expensive, possibly deservedly so. Um, but those outfielders, and what you realize is just that profile is just it dries up so quick. And so for me, like 6 rounds in, you got to be comfortable being this unbalanced for a moment, but knowing you're going to come back and the end product is going to look really good, because what the expectation becomes is the infielders that you're taking, when everyone else is starting to reach for outfielders, that you're making up those points then. And I just really want to stress how, again, like I mentioned how last year, to me it was all about, okay, round one outfielder and then we're off. And this year I'm thinking through the whole part of the whole draft a lot more. And I'm just unwilling to, how's the way to phrase this? I'm not willing to underestimate how bad outfield is late. I want to take possibly a stance where it's like, guys, like Kyle Schwarber should be the 11th pick and Mike Trout should be the 12th pick, and it's insane that they're not. Like I'm like I I want to be, leaning into that thought. And so anyways, that's how I arrived at this. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying you should do every draft this way. I'm just saying, this was a fun start. And, we were talking through before the show started about some of our favorite, infielders to kind of, make up value. I'll give one away of Yandy Diaz, who is just, you can wait on infield. He is just such a great pick at where he's going.
Yeah, I think he's
Where
about
I
at
feel
100.
Yeah, where I feel like I'm making up a ton of ground on infield by targeting him, and even if you're reaching, 10, 12 picks or whatever, like just get him because he's way too cheap right now.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, I think that I don't know if you have anything else on this team. We'll
No, I think we
move
should
over.
look at yours and just another kind of way to go about it.
All right. So my picks or my team is a little bit further in, um, but I did start with a similar. Here, let me adjust
As I
this.
said, oh,
Kind of
there you
in the
go.
way of the ticker.
Yeah, or if you
Yeah.
take off the, I don't know if you can take it off, but that might stretch it enough.
All right. There we go. So my draft is I started very similar with the three outfielders. I got Jordan Alvarez at 8, Kyle Schwarber at 17, and Christian Yelich at 32. So then the difference for me here from what you did, I guess, this isn't fair. You asked me what I thought about yours first, so why don't we,
Flip it around.
I'll go through the team and then I'll let with less commentary and then let you go.
So start.
So
So
so yeah, go ahead.
I love the two of like Jordan and Schwarber. Like I'm all about that. I think that's awesome. I think that's a smash. I think it's totally justifiable to take Christian Yelich anywhere in round 3. He's been a target of mine. Especially if I go an infielder in round 2, then I want Christian Yelich in round 3. You then after the 3 outfielders, which is different than what I did, is you pivoted to pitcher for 4 picks in a row. So that's a lot different than because I went, infielder and then a pitcher and then another outfielder. So it's different in that regard where this staff is looking a lot better than some of the ones I've been putting together. And that's not to say that I don't like this build because that's a really good pitching staff. And if you do fully recover on infield, this is a quote unquote potential super team where I might have dedicated at least one of those pitcher spots to another infielder. I'll get into a little bit in a sec once I hear your thoughts on this team as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think like you are taking and I don't know if this is. I guess is this draft for you? Is this how you've been doing a lot of them, or is this
No,
more a little bit of a unique one with
this
the investment in pitching specifically?
uh no, it's more unique with the three outfielders,
Okay,
specifically.
all my teams are like the outfield
Yeah.
starts
So
for the most part right now.
I'm really valuing the Trey Turner, Corey Seager, uh, I guess Bryce Harper. There's that second round. I guess after Freddie, Matt Olson, Bryce Harper, I'm really valuing that group of infielders that comes next.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm usually going only uh, 2 outfielders and one of those infielders, and then hitting this
Tier
group,
of pitching.
this tier of pitching in especially it's basically the 40s through Logan Webb. So Zach Wheeler, Luis Castillo, Aaron Nola's in there. Can't I can't name them all off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if I get a Burns to fall or something like that, I don't mind it. But yeah, and this one, I'm not sure I like the price on Tyler Glass now. Right now, he's shot up since he went to the Dodgers. I don't know what's your feeling on Glass now on the Dodgers.
Yeah,
Is it an improvement as much as we think in our heads?
we talk so much big picture stuff. Sometimes it's fun to just like actually talk about a player, whether they're good or not, whether they're value or not. I'm really curious to see how they treat him. Like, are they going to look at this, say this guy's been injured all the time? We mostly care about him for October. Is it going to be, a lot of 75 pitch outings in April and 5 innings in that sort of thing? And they try to, keep him healthy for the long run, or are they just going to, kind of treat him, normally, like any other pitcher and kind of hope, last year's career high and or not career high, but MLB high in innings is just going to carry over and he's going to find that durability. It's also interesting because next year, if Shohei Otani's back in the starting rotation in 2025, they're going to go 6 man, and that'll just naturally probably help Glass now on a per start basis and keep him healthy. So, anyways, yeah, I wish I knew that kind of, and we don't. But you talked about Spencer Strider before and the upside that he has. I mean, I think most people would agree at this point that Tyler Glass now is kind of, the mini version of Strider where he hasn't fully shown it, but when he's at his best, he has that upside. And, anyone's always going to be able to talk me into someone getting hot for that playoff run. And I mean, Glass now like absolutely has the ability to carry you in those playoff weeks.
Yeah, and specifically in this decision, the Glasnow decision, it was between Nola and him. That's who I had
Mm-hmm.
at the top of my pitcher queue. Um, and I guess um, knowing some of the boring guys I like to take, which Logan Webb is just like he's just rising to my top of my ownership
I love
because
Logan Webb.
he's at the end of that tier, but he goes like in my rankings, I still only have like the first 4 rounds ranked right now, but or I guess it's 5 or 6. But anyway, um, he's in that same pitching blob for me, and he's going later, so I'm just ending up him as SP2 a lot.
So here's my counter. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but it kind of plays into something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and something that I think I was maybe a little bit wrong about last year. And we know, I think, like, you're going to make up the infield value in this draft to the point where, your infield won't be that much worse maybe than some other teams, and your outfield's going to be better and your pitching's going to be better. And so that's kind of where you're getting that idea of it's the best of both worlds. Something that, again, I've just been deep in the spreadsheets these
Oh,
days.
yeah.
So I'm looking at all the projections and I'm looking at last year's point totals. And I mean, Chris has made graphs like this that show how pitchers score less. And, maybe that's something to keep in mind. I was so focused last year on having a better pitching staff than my opponents, where I really do think the strategy that I took on pitching was correct. But I almost did it in a way where I was putting such a big investment into it that I was costing myself. We talk about, what are you sacrificing in certain parts of the draft where, I mean, just the highest scoring players, um, it's position players, and some of them are those infielders. So yes, you're getting an edge in pitching when you take a pitcher in the early rounds, but I mean, this is a points game, and um, some of those infielders just put up monstrous point totals to the point where you really need every pitcher you're taking early to separate.
True. Yeah. And I definitely understand that. Um, I just, I don't know. I have
Yeah.
a hard time building like that.
Oh, I don't even know if that's right. That's just like something I'm trying to think more
Yeah.
through. And even if that's, structurally right, there's always going to be cases where at the end of the day you got to pick the right players, sort of thing.
Yeah.
We've made the famous Paul Goldschmidt from 2022 example where he was just at a point in a draft where it didn't necessarily make sense to take an infielder or specifically him from a projection standpoint, and then he had the second highest advance rate in the contest.
Yes. Yeah. And so, and maybe this is a stretch, but part of this sort of balanced strategy year to year and staying slightly consistent myself, I feel like I'm I'm playing for almost playing for the year where there isn't that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense or
No, that
it's
makes.
crazy or it's too long term of a thing is and just being consistent year to year on some of these ideas. Maybe some of them are wrong, but maybe I'll have the year where they're right. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, we've analyzed 2 years of data and barely even dug into that. So like some of our assumptions maybe are completely wrong, but maybe I'll be wrong the year that it's right.
The just the whole idea of spotting outliers, and if we're referring, like you're saying, like if you're structurally right, or macro right every time. Yes, there might be an outlier player or an outlier season where some things happen, but over the long haul you'll win more often than not. And I think in almost all phases of life, I agree with that. um and spot if you can spot who the best players are, then I think that's a really good skill to have, and it's just hard to do on a consistent basis. Um, and yeah. So, anyways, your team here, I think, really benefited from this Yandi just even getting him a few picks past ADP, just because I view him as such a staple
Yeah,
if you're waiting on infield.
and I did get O'Neill Cruz 8 picks, so
Past
uh,
ADP.
past ADP. He's shot up a little bit in that couple of weeks. He's moved up to 80 where he was like closer to 95, 100 a couple
Hmm.
of weeks ago when I was drafting. So it's like not like over the course of the tournament, it's not a great value, um, but directionally the way he's going, it's still a value right now. And I think if he's healthy, he's going to move up. Like we
Hmm.
see him, and I think he's playing some winter league. So
Hmm.
I think there's actually some footage out there. We didn't plan this, but do you want to see the finished product on this draft?
For sure. I think it's
Okay.
helpful to see through kind of,
Right.
okay, this was that's quite kind of what I mentioned before. It's like you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and halfway through your draft, then know by the end how it's going to turn out. And um man, I really love your pitching stuff.
I'll be honest. Some of these picks are after listening to you on Benched with Bubba, which go check out Bench with Bubba episode with Brendan. You'll probably hear some of the same stuff that you're hearing, but I don't know. I just like listening to anywhere I can get it. So yeah, here's the staff that I ended up with. Uh, I did reach on your outlier guy of Savale because I was also doing the dishes at the same time, and I had him queued up because I was listening to you talk to about him. But yeah, Glasnow, Webb, Peralta, Luzardo, Zach Eflin, Brandon Fott, and Aaron Savale is the 7 pitchers. So even though I did go aggressive early, I still went with 7, um, just because like the option of adding an 8th infielder, and the option of adding a 7th outfielder, especially with the early outfield cost. And this is where kind of the balance comes in. I felt like it was better um, put into pitching.
Hmm.
Um, and now the infield is got a lot of question marks.
Hmm.
Um, so that's definitely, I don't know if this completely qualifies as balance, but I think there's a group of people here that can make up the points that we're talking about. So Cruz, I think, is going where he should be going. Yandy Diaz is probably going a few rounds too late. So I think like if he meets projection, he can make up ground. I think Reese Hoskins should be close to 100 ADP, depending on where he signs. I did see a rumor that the Mariners were in on him, which would be like the bottom outcome if he ends up hitting there, which just sort of destroys righty power. But then um, I don't know if I have him on my late. We're going to get in some late picks later, but Chapman and Rizzo are both guys that I think are undervalued late, but could just be on the downswing of their careers, which could hurt. And then Junior Caminero, which we'll get into later. I didn't know he was your pick with Bubba, and I honestly don't know anything about him. And then I can't like I just keep wrestling with the Miguel Vargas. Um, who is he actually? And the thing I'll admit I was influenced on this pick here. Um, I'm over in the FTN Roto Discord channel, and Vlad was talking about Vargas going to another team in a trade and how that would be really great for him. So I couldn't help it. I got back to a Miguel Vargas pick. I just can't
Um,
avoid him.
so I just want to comment on your infield if that's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And this to me is like, I guess it's not like exactly much, but the investment in pitching to me reminds me of the type of team I was really into last year. Um, Whereas again, I still want to be done with my pitching before the glob ends, but so far I'm just playing around with some different builds so far this season that haven't had the same investment that you put in. And I think what I would be worried about with this team is like, I think it's, obviously the infield, but it's just that, you know, so if you just look at the point totals, and again, it depends on the projection system you're using, and we'll see how it plays out because the projections aren't always going to be right. But I would just worry that whether it's Altuve or Goldschmidt, or I'm trying to think of some of the other early round infield or like early to mid
Bregman.
round infielders, yeah, like are just like lapping the field, and it makes a bigger impact at the position players because they're scoring more than the pitcher. So again, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm thinking through this stuff myself as well, and I'm not positive what's right, what's wrong yet. I think that's really exciting about where we're at with Underdog MLB. And just the work that Chris and a lot of other people are doing. So, anyways, I would say finish us off with
Okay.
the outfield here because it's interesting.
Yeah. So this group that I was talking about that of similar profile outfielders, I'll include JD Martinez in that. That was a name I forgot. But yeah, so after taking these three first pick or taking my first three picks to outfield with Alvarez, Schwarber, and Yelich, I felt pretty good that those three guys can carry a couple of potential point per at bat guys in JD Martinez and Chris Bryant. Um, oh man, I might be back on Chris Bryant this year. I'm saying this out loud. Uh, friend friend of the show, Brad, who you'll see as in most of these drafts. Also, he posted his exposures the other day, and he had them. And I was like, oh man, that's scary. And that was in the period where I wasn't drafting. Then I came back, and I'm like looking at the outfielders in that position. I'm like, oh man, am I ready to be hurt again? Or is he ready to be hurt again? Maybe that's more accurate. But yeah. So then I'll admit I forgot about Lourdes Gurriel before he signed, and now I want to get him before his ADP goes up. He could get it to 150, or one now that he has a spot,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he's gonna have pretty consistent playing time in
I'd
Arizona.
expect him to.
Yeah,
Um, well, yeah, we'll have to save Chris Bryant for another time. I want to get into our late round picks here.
yeah,
Um,
we,
but
we're
because talking players sometimes it's really fun to do, but it's also at the end of the day it is really important. Like when you can consistently be right about edge cases or volatile players. Not every single time, but more often than most. That's also going to make a huge impact. And um, yeah, I do think that's there is skill in that. It's not just this game isn't just here's the macro way to play and then go do it and just do it a million times and it'll work out to where you get that top prize. So
yeah.
do you want to go first with what are we up first? Pitcher? Do you
Yeah,
want to go first or me?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just a little quick introduction. I don't know how it's going to work out every time, but I'm calling this the bonus round. Uh, this is going to be maybe it's not always going to pertain to the main topic of the night, but it's a little treat for people that stick with us for the full hour, maybe just like a 5-10 minute segment here at the end. And knowing us, we'll probably talk through this segment and skip it often as time goes on. But this week we got one late round pick that we like at pitcher, infield, and outfield. So my pitcher before and even after the signing with Kansas City is Seth Lugo. Uh, what we probably should have done was wrote their ADP down here. But yeah, he did not get a bump from signing with KC.
226.
Yeah, so he is essentially there. There's not many better places he could land. The question with Seth Lugo last year was, can he be a starter? Can he be a reliable 5-6 inning starter after converting from so many years pitching long relief or just 1 inning relief for the Mets? And I think he went out there and proved that he could do it. He's an older guy, but he doesn't have the exact same wear as somebody his age. And uh, I just think I'm not buying into pretty much any of the other pitchers. And maybe someday we'll get to the Cole Reagans discussion. But I'm not buying into any of the other pitchers in Kansas City. I think they could all still struggle. And I just see him as not an anchor in terms of he's going to be the guy that gets you the win, but the guy that's going to get the innings there.
And quality starts is really important. I mean, Seth Lugo to me is just screams of 6 innings, 3 runs, and I mean that in the best way possible. So I got nothing bad to say about Seth Lugo. I like that call. My pitcher was Aaron Savali, and I mentioned him on Bench with Bubba. And like Matt said, I appreciate that shout out because Bubba is someone who comes from more of a this is Casey Bubba, by the way, on Twitter, and he comes from more of the roto background, but he's found himself diving into Underdog, and I just think that's really cool that we're seeing some people interested in that. Anyways, I mentioned Aaron Savali, who honestly maybe this is silly, but like he just like looks like the next Zach Eflin to me in the sense of a pitcher who was maybe interesting and on another team and had some moments, and then the Rays targeted him and they just they made him better. Like at this time last year, like Zach Eflin was not someone who was thought of as a kind of someone who could be a staple in your fantasy rotation. And I know in Roto at least he finishes like the number 6 SP, and I think with the whole discussion about the glob, which is really important, and I've put a ton of thought into that so far this offseason. If you can predict someone who's going to end up in the glob, but before they do, I think that's really valuable. And again, Eflin wasn't someone who started last season in that group. And to me, just like the price and Zavala, it just doesn't make sense. Like the way I phrased it when I was on with Bubba is I don't care what 2022 Aaron Savale looked like. 2021 Aaron Savale, he's on the Rays now. Like he's going to be different. And, historically speaking, that means a little bit of upside.
Yeah. The only slight pushback that I would give is that he did come from another organization in the Guardians that we tend to have that same similar positive feeling about their pitching development.
Mm-hmm. That's a
Um,
good point.
I mean,
That's a good point. And
to me, it's like the Dodgers, the Rays, and the Guardians are sort of the three that we have at that top tier of our how true and how actually they rank in the development. We're not smart enough to know, but those are three at the top in my head of what are they doing? What can they do with this pitcher?
That's a great way to phrase it.
So yeah, I'll let you want to go since it's another
Another
Rays
Ray.
player and another guy you gave out with Bubba, your infielder.
And it's another player who used to be on the Guardians, um, in Junior Caminero, uh, who I gave out. And I've been meaning to tweet this out at some point and maybe give him like a little bit of shine. And, but Junior Caminero, if those aren't familiar, he's a top 5 prospect in baseball. He played just a handful of games with the Rays at the end of last season. It was a bit of a surprising call up, but he does profile as that guy who they're going to put him on the opening day roster if they want a shot at him to be the guy who wins the Rookie of the Year and brings them back a draft pick like we saw from Gunnar Henderson and Corbin Carroll this past year. And that doesn't mean he's guaranteed. They haven't said he's going to be on the roster yet. And, it's the Rays, so they could even platoon him, especially early. Um, to me, if Evan Carter, and I know he's an outfielder, is going in the top 100 picks, like there's no reason. Caminero is literally free at the end of drafts. Um, don't be afraid. He's got, I think, a 230 ADP right now. Don't be at pick, 201 and saying, oh, I really want to get that full value on Caminero necessarily, because this is the exact type of guy where if he did have a big spring training, like from Anthony Volpe or Jordan Walker, those guys that we saw last year, the hype train is just going to be out of control. So he could rise a ton. This is a contest. You're playing for the top prize. You're not trying to finish fifth in your league necessarily. And so he feels like the right risks to take just so late in the draft.
And now is the time to take the risk on a player like that before we get into spring training, before we get roster like fully shaken out, because either he's going to go off the board and you just it's a lost pick and just you kind of chalk that up to drafting now in December. But if he comes out and the news is positive on him, he's going to go up because he has that draft pedigree or prospect pedigree. And once he gets a news cycle rolling on him, he's going to go up. So now is the best time to take the risk on a player like that.
And your infielder is someone who I'm a fan of as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So there's a whole catcher conversation to be had here. We'll do it short. Playing time matters because we score on a week to week basis, and catchers that get time off just miss games, have lower projections on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of thought you need to put into them. But the thing with my guy, William Contreras, is that I'm pretty confident that most days that he's not catching, just based on the Brewers lineup, they need him. So he is going to be DHing. Obviously, the obstacle is the big group of outfielders that they have, especially with signing to Churio to this deal and figuring out playing time with all those guys. And was one of those guys going to creep into the DH position? And I don't know if maybe they bring in another infielder. I'd love to have Matt Chapman, but I think every team at this point should sign Matt Chapman. So yeah, it's William Contreras because I think the playing time is there. And who's someone I'm trying to think? Even a guy like JT Realmuto
I was just going to name
right
him.
now, who 2 years ago the playing time was there. We saw, we've seen 2 extended seasons with him of deep playoff runs of extending his season. So he's the sort of player that has an awesome per plate appearance, and I'm, but he's getting drafted way ahead of Contreras, and I'm more worried about those days that he's not playing and him not DHing.
Yeah, that's just I didn't even I flagged William as again another similar to Yandy infield staple to get late. I wasn't even paying attention to some other catchers in the draft, so I didn't even realize Joe was going ahead. But that's just
Will
wrong.
Smith is
That's just
another
wrong. Yeah, even
guy.
Will Smith feels like he's had this upside that's been tantalizing for a few years now, and I think some people may be starting to get over it. But I still feel like when I hear the name Will Smith, I'm like, oh yeah, he could be the top catcher. But from a playing time perspective, it's Adley and it's William, and there's almost a case you could make to me that they're the only 2 catchers worth drafting on Underdog. But I actually really like that as a topic, and we should maybe write that down to cover another time.
Yeah, yeah, and Wilson might be another one, depending on where the St. Louis lineup goes. Wilson Contreras.
Um,
But yeah,
so
yeah,
for then we each picked a late round outfielder that we liked, and
yeah.
when I saw,
I just changed mine. I don't want to have two homer picks.
all right,
So
when I saw this on the rundown that Matt had added this in, my first thought, and I wrote it into the sheet, was, do those exist? Like, are there late round outfielders that you like as a concept? So it's really hard. It's really ugly. I'll just mention mine quickly. Jock Peterson, who's
yeah,
not on a team yet, who's similar to Lourdes. Um, as you mentioned, once he signed, people would start, for whatever reason, getting more comfortable with it. Jock's free right now, so even if he winds up in the worst spot possible, um,
yeah.
he's your last round pick, and
ADP is 239.3, so he's almost
yeah.
close to falling off, even having an ADP.
So I'll just mention quickly, the Bat X projections aren't out yet. He was someone the Bat X really liked last year, Underdog included. And I did this end of season deep dive. I have him on like every dynasty roster of mine. And I just wanted to know, like, at the end of this past season, like, is this someone who I should be, really worried about and moving on from? And the analysis I got was that I did, pointed me in a direction that, he was a little unlucky. It was San Francisco, which kills lefty power. Um, anyways, my point is, like, there's a lot of ways where he's not done, and I wonder if when the Bat X projections come out, if he's gonna not be as big of a value as he was going into last year necessarily, but a big value compared to where he's being drafted right now.
Yeah, and even if he's a platoon, he's a strong side
Mm-hmm.
platoon. Whereas like uh, I'll Adam Duvall is like the same player in my head from the other side of and so he's still searching for a team.
Mm-hmm.
So Jock definitely has a little advantage on him. So mine is mostly a volume play, and that's Brent Rooker. He's 197.7, so not quite. He's probably drafted in every draft, unlike Jock. So that's a whole nother conversation. But you are getting him on almost every draft. Um, he is going, and it's really just who's going to play for the Athletics. Like, if he can, like, I don't like he started off hot, and he had those streaks, and I don't believe that's who he actually is. I think the overall season, the average still looks good enough for where we're taking him as an outfielder. And I don't feel like there's any reason he won't get to keep playing in Oakland. So it's, and part of it is also, I thought he was going to be more expensive. I thought he would be drafted earlier, and maybe people are smarter. I was thinking this based off of the hot series and that he had. So it's also kind of a like sticker shock in the good way. Like, oh, I can get him at this price. I kind of like that.
So, focusing on playing time like you are is a really smart way to play it, especially at that point in the draft. If you're taking an outfielder, the move might be more of a volume play than someone who's either young or have shown some promise on a per plate appearance, but has like no floor sort of thing. Like, Rooker's playing time is going to give him somewhat of a floor, which is rare to find late at outfield. We've mentioned a couple topics for another time. I think what we were going to wrap up with today, we should save as well, which was just a
Yeah,
conversation. And we've
I
pushed this now like two
I left
times.
that on there from last time in the rundown, so I honestly didn't think we were going to get to it. So I'm not
But
feeling too bad.
but it's a really important conversation, and I think it was asked about in the comments. Which, by the way, anyone who is liking and commenting and subscribing on YouTube, like, that's just like so cool. That's really appreciated, and we do read everything and notice the feedback that this is getting so far. So that's
Yeah,
really cool to see.
yeah, because
But good.
we're not here to tell you that we know exactly how to draft. We're here. our goal, like through this whole thing, is just to open up and expand the conversation. So like we're not trying to build like a YouTube brand or a whatever. Like we're just here because we love this game and we love baseball in general and we want to expand this conversation. So yeah, all the feedback, questions, whatever, we'll try to get to as much as possible. If you have an idea for a show, believe me, it's probably already on a list somewhere or uh, it'll get added.
Yeah, I love the way you phrased that. Um, yeah, I mean, going into, next year, like talking about 2024, like the calendar year, it's the holidays are here, it's we didn't have a contest last year. I keep thinking about that. Um,
Yeah,
and
and
so
we're
it
like thirty
feels like
percent
we're ahead of the
full
game.
on this
Yeah.
guy, which is ridiculous. And like, I'm, I don't know if it's the influx of football money that got paid out, but it's like there's the consistent people you see in most every draft, but outside of that, there's a group of people that are trying this out, and that's awesome. Hopefully,
Mhm.
they can pace themselves and they're here the whole time. And hopefully we can help with that. Um,
Mhm.
the other thing I will say is that we definitely are going to recommit to getting some rankings out there if you are a new drafter. So I'm going to commit us to a New Year's resolution here that by January 1st we're going to have some sort of ranking out over on Stacking Dingers. So I didn't run that by you or Chris, but we're going to do it.
All right. We're gonna my only request then is we'll need a whole episode to talk about rankings and philosophy and how to use them, because that's something that I'm very passionate
Yeah.
about as well. But no, that's definitely doable, and it's a good exercise. It's something that everyone should do, even if you're not, quote unquote, creating content or anything like that, just to get your headspace in how you're thinking through. So yeah, I think that's a great place to, wrap up on. This was, man, hour 10 minutes almost. Like, great conversation, Matt. Like I learned a lot from this, and I'm excited to keep moving forward.
Yeah. So yeah, everybody, thanks for watching. For Brendan and myself, have a good holidays. I think we should have an episode of some sort out next week after Christmas. So yeah, have a good holiday and take